In the shadow of corporate skyscrapers, Eliza Winthrop struggles for recognition in her domineering father's company, trying to prove she's worthy of inheriting his empire, even when it means compromising her own beliefs. During a solitary hike in the mountains meant to clear her thoughts before a major deal, fate delivers a venomous blow. A snake bite leaves her on the edge of life and death until a mysterious hermit with a dark military past comes to her rescue. Now, balancing between two worlds, Eliza must decide which path to choose. Return to her familiar life, or build something new that connects corporate power with the ancient wisdom of the forest. Before we begin, write in the comments where you're listening to our stories from. Subscribe to our channel, it's free, and you can always change your mind. Enjoy the story. The venom was already spreading through her veins when she heard his voice, low and steady, cutting through her panic like a beacon. Don't move. Stay with me. Eliza blinked through tears of pain, her vision blurring at the edges as she watched the stranger kneel beside her. His hands moved with practiced precision, crushing leaves between his fingers until they released a pungent sap. The mountains around them seemed to spin as the snake's poison worked its way through her system. "Who are you?" she gasped. The man's eyes met hers, dark, intense, but surprisingly gentle. "Someone who's trying to keep you alive," he said, pressing the herbal poultice against the angry puncture wounds on her ankle. "Not now, breathe. This is going to hurt." The pain shot up her leg like liquid fire. She'd been hiking alone on this remote trail for 3 days, determined to clear her head before returning to the suffocating reality awaiting her in Seattle. Now, her carefully planned escape was ending in disaster. "Drink this," he ordered, offering a small vial of amber liquid. "All of it?" Eliza hesitated, her corporate-trained instincts flaring with suspicion. "It's medicine," he explained firmly. "We're miles from the nearest ranger station, and that was a timber rattler. Without this, you won't make it." With trembling hands, she swallowed the bitter concoction. "My name is Daniel. Daniel Reed." "Eliza," she managed. "Eliza Winthrop." She didn't tell him the rest, that she was Eliza Winthrop of Winthrop Industries, that her sudden disappearance had likely sent her father's security team into overdrive, that the business empire she was meant to inherit was probably in chaos without its reluctant heiress. "The venom's spreading fast," Daniel murmured. "We need to get you somewhere safe. My cabin is about 2 miles northeast of here." "I can't walk," Eliza whispered. "I'll carry you." Before she could protest, he gathered her into his arms. Her pack he slung over his shoulder, the added weight seemingly insignificant to his lean frame. There was strength in his body that belied his quiet demeanor, strength that came from living in these mountains rather than building it in some sterile city gym. As he moved with surprising grace through the wilderness, Eliza fought to stay conscious. The forest passing around them was beautiful in the golden afternoon light, but she could barely focus on it through the haze of venom-induced fever. "Stay with me, Eliza," Daniel said whenever her eyes began to close. "Tell me why you're out here alone." "Needed space to think," she said between labored breaths. "Too much noise in the city." Daniel nodded as if this made perfect sense. "The mountains have a way of clearing the mind." "You live out here?" she asked, fighting to stay present. 5 years now. Built the cabin myself." Through the trees ahead, Eliza caught glimpses of a small wooden structure nestled against a hillside. The cabin was modest but sturdy looking, with a stone chimney and a small covered porch. It blended so perfectly into its surroundings that she might have missed it entirely if hiking past. Daniel carried her inside, the warmth of the interior a stark contrast to the cooling evening air. With careful movements, he laid her on a narrow bed covered with handmade quilts. The cabin was simple. One main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, shelves lined with books and jars of dried plants, and a door that presumably led to another room. "Home, sweet home," Daniel said with a hint of irony as he moved to start a fire. Eliza shivered, her body alternating between burning fever and bone-deep chills. "Thank you," she whispered, though the words seemed grossly inadequate. Daniel didn't respond as he filled a pot with water and hung it over the growing flames. He rummaged through jars on his shelves, selecting dried herbs with practiced efficiency. The fire's light cast his profile in sharp relief, highlighting the angles of his face and the intensity of his concentration. The pull of unconsciousness grew stronger. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Daniel returning to her side, a steaming cup in his hands and concern etched across his features. "Stay with me," he urged, his voice following her into the void. She didn't know how much time had passed when she next opened her eyes. The cabin was dark except for the glow of the fire and a single oil lamp. Daniel sat beside her bed, his head bowed as if in deep thought, one hand resting on her wrist to monitor her pulse. "Am I dying?" Eliza asked, her voice a fragile whisper. Daniel's head snapped up, relief washing over his face. "Not anymore. The fever broke about an hour ago." "How do you feel?" She considered the question. The searing pain had subsided to a dull throb, and the terrifying sense of slipping away had passed. "Never said or better," she managed. "Alive thanks to you." He shrugged off her gratitude. You're strong. Most people would have given up by now." "I'm not most people," Eliza said, a hint of her usual determination returning. Daniel's mouth curved into the barest hint of a smile. "I'm beginning to see that." He helped her drink some water and a bitter medicinal tea. In the firelight, she could see him more clearly. He was probably in his mid-30s, with dark hair streaked prematurely with silver at the temples. His face was weathered by the elements but handsome in a rugged way. There was something in his eyes that suggested he'd seen more than his share of life's darker corners. "How do you know so much about snake venom?" she asked. Daniel hesitated. "I was a combat medic, 3 tours in Afghanistan. You learn to work with what you have when medical supplies are scarce." The simple explanation answered so many questions while raising dozens more. Eliza wanted to press further, but exhaustion was pulling at her again. "Rest now," Daniel said. "We'll talk more tomorrow." As she drifted back to sleep, Eliza realized with strange clarity that for the first time in years, no one knew where she was. No security team monitoring her movements, no business associates tracking her schedule, no father checking her whereabouts. In the middle of nowhere, poisoned and dependent on a stranger's care, she paradoxically felt a profound sense of freedom. The irony wasn't lost on her as consciousness faded. She'd come to the wilderness seeking solitude and clarity, only to find herself more intimately connected to another human being than she'd been in years. Whatever happened next, Eliza knew with certainty that the path she'd been on had irrevocably changed course. Days passed in the quiet of Daniel's cabin as Eliza's strength gradually returned. Morning sunlight spilled through small windows, afternoons stretched into companionable silence, and evenings were spent by the crackling fire. It was a rhythm entirely foreign to her tightly scheduled corporate life. "You haven't asked who I am," Eliza said on the morning of her 3rd day, as Daniel changed the dressing on her ankle. Daniel glanced up, his hands never pausing in their careful work. "You told me. Eliza Winthrop. That's my name, not who I am. Out here, that's all that matters." He secured the bandage with practiced efficiency. "The force doesn't care about titles or bank accounts." The answer startled her. "How do you know I have either?" Daniel shrugged. "Your hiking boots cost more than my monthly expenses. Your watch is a limited edition. The satellite phone in your pack is top of the line." He paused. "Plus, you have the posture of someone used to being listened to." Eliza felt her cheeks warm. She was used to being recognized. Her face had been in enough business magazines. But this clinical assessment of her wealth felt more exposing somehow. "I don't judge," Daniel added, standing. "We all have our burdens to carry." "What's yours?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Daniel's expression closed off. "Rest. You need it." The day passed slowly. Daniel left to check his traps and gather herbs, giving Eliza time alone with her thoughts. She examined the cabin. Shelves of books with notes in the margins. Jars of dried plants meticulously labeled. Simple tools maintained with obvious care. Everything spoke of purpose, of intention. When Daniel returned, he carried freshly caught fish and wild greens. As he prepared their meal, Eliza broke the silence. "I run Winthrop Industries," she said. "Or I'm supposed to. My father still treats me like I'm 12, and the board watches for any sign of weakness." Daniel nodded, continuing his work. "That explains the search helicopters." "What?" Eliza jerked upright. "Helicopters. When?" "This morning. 2 of them, sweeping the trails about 5 miles west." He glanced at her. "They won't find us. This valley doesn't appear on most maps." Eliza felt torn between relief and concern. Her father would be beside himself with worry. The company would be in chaos. And yet, the thought of being found filled her with a strange dread. "Should we signal them somehow?" she asked, her voice betraying her conflict. Daniel studied her face. "Do you want to be found, Eliza?" The question hung in the air, simple yet profound. Did she? Part of her knew her responsibilities demanded it. Yet another part, a part she barely recognized, wanted nothing more than to remain hidden in this cabin with this enigmatic man. "I don't know," she admitted. Daniel nodded as if her answer made perfect sense. "Then we wait until you do." As the days stretched into a week, Eliza's ankle improved enough for short walks. Daniel taught her to identify medicinal plants, showed her how to navigate using only the sun and stars, shared knowledge earned through years of solitary living. "Why did you come here?" she asked one evening as they sat by the fire, the question she'd been holding back since her arrival. Daniel was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. "I was a medic in Afghanistan," he finally said, his voice low and even. "In my third tour, we were ambushed. Supply lines cut off. I had a friend, Jake, with a shrapnel wound. I tried everything, used every technique I knew." He stared into the flames. "It wasn't enough." "I'm sorry," Eliza said softly. "After that, I couldn't go back to conventional medicine. Everything felt wrong. Too sterile, too removed from actual healing." His gaze returned to the present, focusing on her. "So I came here, where healing is immediate and necessary. Where I have to rely on myself and what I know, not on systems that can fail at the worst possible moment." Eliza absorbed this, seeing Daniel in a new light. His isolation wasn't escape. It was a deliberate choice to practice a more direct, personal form of healing. "Thank you," she said, "for telling me." On her 10th day in the cabin, they were walking near a small stream when they discovered an injured fox kit, its paw caught in what looked like an old trap not set by Daniel. With gentle hands, he freed the small creature, examining its injured leg. "Can we help it?" Eliza asked, surprising herself with how much she wanted to save this wild thing. Daniel carefully wrapped the fox in his outer shirt. "We can try." Back at the cabin, he cleaned the wound and made a tiny splint. The fox, which Eliza named Rusty, became part of their daily routine. As they nursed it back to health, something shifted between them, a partnership forming around this shared act of healing. One evening, as rain drummed on the cabin roof, Eliza found herself telling Daniel about the crisis that had driven her to the mountains. A major timber acquisition her father and the board expected her to finalize, one that would destroy old-growth forests that had stood for centuries. "I wanted to be an environmental lawyer, did you know that?" she said, stroking Rusty's russet fur. "Before my father convinced me that I could do more good from inside the company." "And can you?" Daniel asked, his voice free of judgment. "I thought so," Eliza sighed. "But every time I try to implement sustainable practices, I hit walls of tradition and profit margins. This deal would be the final nail, cutting down trees that were already ancient when Columbus arrived." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "What if there was another way?" "Like what?" "A different acquisition. A company already practicing sustainable forestry." The idea took root immediately. "Halcyon Forestry," Eliza said, mind racing. "They've pioneered selective harvesting techniques. Their yield is lower, but their practices preserve the ecosystem and actually increase land value long-term." "Sounds like a better legacy," Daniel observed. Eliza looked at him, seeing not just the solitary healer, but a man of profound wisdom. "Yes, sir," she said softly. "It does." 2 weeks after the snake bite, Eliza stood on the cabin porch, watching dawn break over the valley. Her ankle was nearly healed, her mind clearer than it had been in years. She knew she would have to return soon, face her father, confront the board with her alternative proposal. The thought no longer filled her with dread. Something had changed within her, a certainty, a rootedness she'd never possessed before. Behind her, the cabin door opened. Daniel joined her, offering a mug of steaming tea. They stood in comfortable silence, shoulders almost touching as the sun climbed higher. "When I go back," Eliza said finally, "everything will be different." "How so?" "I'll be different." She turned to face him. "I know now there's another way to be. Another way to live." Daniel's expression softened, something warming in his eyes that made her heart beat faster. "Will you come back?" he asked, the question carrying weight beyond its simple words. Eliza held his gaze. "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "If you'll have me." Before Daniel could respond, the distant thrum of helicopter blades broke the morning stillness. Eliza felt her stomach drop as a sleek black aircraft appeared over the ridge, heading directly for the cabin clearing. "That's my father's helicopter," she said, recognizing the Winthrop Industries logo. "How did he find us?" Daniel's expression grew serious. "Someone always finds what matters enough to look for." As the helicopter descended, sending pine needles and dust swirling, Eliza reached for Daniel's hand. Their fingers intertwined, a silent promise exchanged in the moment before their peaceful world collided with the one she left behind. The cabin door stood open behind them, a threshold between worlds that Eliza now knew, with absolute certainty, she would cross again. The helicopter's downdraft bent the grass and wildflowers as it settled in the clearing. Vernon Winthrop emerged, tall, distinguished, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that looked absurdly out of place in the wilderness. Two security personnel flanked him, scanning the surroundings with professional vigilance. "Elizabeth," he said, using her full name as he always did. "Thank God you're alive." "Hello, Father." Eliza remained on the porch, still holding Daniel's hand. "How did you find me?" "Satellite imaging," he replied dismissively. "We've had teams combing these mountains for 2 weeks." His gaze shifted to Daniel, assessing and calculating. "Who's this?" "This is Daniel Reed. He saved my life when I was bitten by a rattlesnake." Vernon's expression softened marginally. "Then I owe you my thanks, Mr. Reed." He extended his hand. Inside the cabin, Vernon took in the rustic surroundings before turning back to his daughter. "The board is in crisis mode. The timber acquisition is stalled. We're losing ground to competitors." "I've been thinking about that deal," Eliza said, her voice steady. "I have concerns about the environmental impact." "We've been over this. The environmental assessments meet all legal requirements." "Minimal legal requirements," Eliza countered. "Those forests took centuries to grow. We'd be destroying something irreplaceable for short-term profit." Vernon's jaw tightened. "You're talking about billions in potential revenue. I'm talking about our legacy. And I have an alternative proposal. Halcyon Forestry has developed sustainable harvesting techniques that preserve old growth while still yielding profitable lumber. Acquiring them instead would position Winthrop Industries at the forefront of sustainable business practices." A tense silence fell as Vernon considered her words. Eliza held his gaze steadily, aware of Daniel's quiet presence across the room. 2 days, Vernon finally said. "You have 2 days to present a convincing case to the board. The helicopter will return for you tomorrow morning." After Vernon departed, Daniel placed a steaming mug of tea before Eliza. "You're going back," he said. It wasn't a question. "I have to," Eliza replied. "This is my chance to actually change things, to redirect the company towards something more sustainable." "Isn't that worth fighting for?" "What about after?" Daniel asked. "If you win this battle, what comes next?" "I don't know. More battles, I suppose. A complete overhaul of our resource management practices. All from within the system that created the problems in the first place." "Systems can change," she said. "They have to, or they collapse." "Yes," Daniel agreed. "But people rarely change, especially those with power and privilege to protect." "Some people change," she said softly. "I have." They fell silent, each lost in thought. Outside, the day had reached its full glory, sunlight dappling through the trees. "Will you come back?" Daniel asked suddenly. Eliza looked at him, at the man who had saved her life, who had taught her to see the forest as a living pharmacy, who had shown her a different way of being in the world. "Yes," she said simply, "if you'll have me." Something shifted in Daniel's eyes, a warming, an opening. "This place isn't on any map, but you'll find it." That evening, they walked to the ridge overlooking the valley. The view was spectacular, miles of untamed wilderness stretching to distant mountains. "I understand now why you chose this," she said. "Why you stayed. It heals something in you that you didn't know was wounded." As they made their way back to the cabin, Eliza found herself memorizing everything. The particular slant of sunlight through the pine needles, the soft cushion of moss beneath her boots. In her small bedroom, Eliza began gathering her few belongings. She would miss this, miss him, miss the version of herself that had emerged in this place, stronger, clearer, more authentic than the person who had fled into the wilderness 3 weeks ago. But she wasn't fleeing anymore. She was walking deliberately toward a challenge, armed with new perspective and determination. And perhaps if she was very fortunate, she would find her way back to this hidden valley, to the man who had shown her a different way of being in the world. The Winthrop Industries helicopter arrived at dawn. Eliza stood on the cabin porch, her backpack at her feet, wearing the same hiking clothes she'd arrived in. Daniel emerged from the cabin, Rusty cradled in one arm. "Just until his paw's fully healed," he explained. "Then he goes back to the wild where he belongs." "I'll be back," she said, holding his gaze. Daniel nodded once. "I know." The journey back to civilization was jarring. The helicopter's noise, the sudden transition from wilderness to the gleaming tower of Winthrop Industries headquarters in downtown Seattle. In her private bathroom, Eliza stared at her reflection. The woman looking back was noticeably different from the one who had fled into the mountains. Her skin was tanned, her body leaner, but the most striking change was in her eyes. Clear, focused, untroubled by the anxious need for approval that had driven her for so long. By the time she entered the boardroom, Eliza had prepared her presentation with meticulous care. Facts, figures, projections, all arranged to support an argument that came from a place deeper than mere business strategy. "Gentlemen, ladies," Eliza nodded, "thank you for accommodating this meeting on such short notice." "We're just relieved to have you back safely," said Harold Jennings, the eldest board member. "Your father told us about your misadventure." Eliza smiled slightly. "Not a misadventure, Mr. Jennings. An education." She launched into her presentation, laying out the case for acquiring Halcyon Forestry instead of the larger timber company. Her argument was comprehensive, covering financial projections, regulatory landscapes, market trends, and the premium consumers were willing to pay for sustainably sourced products. "The days of clear-cutting forests for short-term profit are ending," she concluded. "Environmental regulations will only become more stringent. Companies that adapt now will thrive. Those that resist will be left scrambling." Vernon Winthrop leaned forward. "An impressive presentation, Elizabeth, but it still doesn't address the immediate revenue shortfall this alternative would create." "Short-term thinking is exactly what's destroying our planet," Eliza replied. "And it's ultimately bad business. By year 3, the profit margins start to exceed the conventional model, and by year 5, they're significantly higher." "I move we take this to a vote," Vernon said finally. The motion passed by the narrowest of margins, 7-7, with Vernon casting the deciding vote in favor of Eliza's proposal. After the board members departed, Vernon remained. "You've changed," he observed. "Yes," Eliza agreed simply. "It suits you." He stood. "Though I'm not sure it suits the role you're meant to fill." Eliza met his gaze steadily. "Perhaps the role needs to change then." A ghost of a smile touched Vernon's lips. "Perhaps." He moved toward the door, then paused. "This man, the one who saved you, he seems to have made quite an impression." "He showed me a different way of seeing the world," Eliza replied. "One where healing matters more than profit, where what you build with your hands means more than what you acquire with your money." Vernon considered this. "Dangerous ideas for someone in your position." "Necessary ones," she countered. Back in her penthouse apartment, Eliza felt strangely disconnected from the luxury surrounding her. The designer furniture, the automated systems, the curated art collection, all of it seemed hollow compared to the simple authenticity of Daniel's cabin. Enjoying our stories? Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss any of our upcoming content. Now let's get back to our story. The following weeks were a whirlwind as Eliza directed the acquisition of Halcyon Forestry. She threw herself into the work with renewed purpose, personally overseeing the integration of sustainable practices. Board members who had initially opposed her were gradually won over by the positive market response and Eliza's unwavering conviction. But beneath the professional accomplishments, a restlessness grew. The city felt too loud, too fast, too artificial after her time in the wilderness. 1 month after her return, her assistant delivered a small wooden box. Hand-carved from pine, its lid etched with a design of mountain ridges. Inside lay a small leather pouch filled with dried herbs. Yarrow, she recognized immediately. A folded note nestled beside it, written in Daniel's precise handwriting, "For healing," in all its forms. Before that night, Eliza made a decision. The next morning, she called a meeting with her father and the executive team. "I'm proposing a new division," she announced, "Winthrop Wilderness Conservation. It will operate semi-autonomously, focused on preserving critical habitat and developing educational programs on sustainable resource management." Vernon's expression remained neutral. "And who would head this division?" "I would," Eliza replied. "It would require me to split my time between Seattle and the field operations." "This is about him, isn't it? The mountain man." "This is about me," Eliza corrected gently. "About the kind of leader I want to be, the kind of company I want to build, the legacy I want to leave. But yes, it's also about what I learned from Daniel. About balance. About healing what's been damaged." A long silence followed as father and daughter engaged in a wordless negotiation. "Draw up a detailed proposal," Vernon said finally. "If it makes business sense, I'll support it." 3 months after her snake bite, Eliza stood once more on the forest path where fate had altered the course of her life. The cabin looked exactly as she remembered, smoke curling from the chimney. As she approached, the door opened and Daniel stepped out onto the porch, Jasper at his heels. "You came back," he said simply. Eliza smiled. "I said I would." "How long can you stay?" he asked. Eliza set down her pack. "I've established a new division at Winthrop. Conservation, education, sustainable resource management. Its headquarters will be 50 miles from here, close enough to civilization for business purposes, far enough into the wilderness to matter. Understanding dawned in Daniel's eyes. So you found a middle path. I'm trying too, she admitted. It won't be easy balancing between worlds. Few worthwhile things are, he replied, reaching out a hand to her. As their fingers intertwined, a rustle in the undergrowth drew their attention. A flash of russet fur darted across the clearing. A young fox, moving with perfect health, its right front paw showing no sign of injury. Rusty? Eliza asked, delighted. Daniel nodded, a rare smile transforming his face. He comes back sometimes, never stays long, but he remembers. Like me, Eliza said softly. Not quite like you, Daniel replied, his voice warm. He belongs to the forest. You... His grip on her hand tightened slightly. You belong wherever you choose. 2 years to the day after the snake bite that had altered the course of her life, Eliza stood at the podium in the newly completed visitor center of Winthrop Wilderness Conservation. Before her, an audience of journalists, corporate partners, environmental advocates, and local community members waited expectantly. The center itself was a testament to her vision, a harmonious blend of sustainable architecture and educational purpose, where wilderness and human ingenuity met in respectful balance. 2 years ago, Eliza began, I came to these mountains seeking escape. What I found instead was connection to the land, to a way of living I had never considered, and to a truth about business and conservation that has transformed how Winthrop Industries approaches its responsibilities. From her vantage point, she could see her father seated in the front row, his expression a mixture of pride and lingering skepticism. Beside him sat board members who had initially opposed her vision, but now proudly claimed credit for the initiative that had boosted both the company's reputation and its profitability. This center represents more than a corporate commitment to sustainability, she continued. It embodies a fundamental shift in how we understand value. The ancient forests that surround us are worth more standing than harvested. As she spoke, Eliza's gaze drifted to the back of the room, where Daniel stood near the exit. He wore a simple button-down shirt instead of his usual flannel, his concession to the formal nature of the event, but otherwise looked as he always did, steady, grounded, present because it mattered to her. Their relationship had deepened over the past 2 years, evolving into a partnership neither had anticipated, but both now cherished. The cabin expansion had become a home they shared when her corporate responsibilities allowed. A sanctuary where Eliza could reconnect with the simpler truths that now guided her life. The skeptics had been proven wrong. The conservation division had generated unprecedented positive publicity, attracted top talent to Winthrop Industries, and opened new markets for sustainably produced products. But more meaningful to Eliza were the less quantifiable outcomes. The return of wolf packs to valleys where they had been absent for generations, the restoration of waterways once polluted by industrial runoff, the reforestation of slopes scarred by clear-cutting. As the formal ribbon cutting concluded and the crowds thinned, Eliza found Daniel standing on the observation deck, looking out over the valley that had become their shared home. You gave a good speech, he said as she joined him. High praise from a man of few words, she replied with a smile. They stood in comfortable silence, watching as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the protected forest. Thousands of acres that would remain unlogged, undeveloped, alive with the complex web of relationships that had evolved over centuries. Did you ever imagine this? Eliza asked. When you found me on the trail that day? Daniel shook his head. I was just trying to keep you alive. You did more than that, she said softly. You showed me a different way to be alive. Vernon Winthrop approached, his security detail hanging back at a discreet distance. Elizabeth, he nodded, then turned to Daniel with more formality. Mr. Winthrop, Daniel replied, equally formal but without deference. The center is impressive, Vernon said. More impressive is what you've accomplished with the Conservation Division's bottom line. It was high praise from a man who measured success primarily in financial terms. Thank you, Father, Eliza said. But the true measure of success is what's happening out there. She gestured to the forest. The returning wildlife, the improving water quality, the carbon sequestration. Vernon nodded, though Eliza knew he still saw these as secondary benefits rather than primary goals. They had reached a detente over the past 2 years, Vernon acknowledging the business case for her vision, Eliza accepting that transformation within Winthrop Industries would continue to be incremental. As twilight deepened, Eliza and Daniel made their way down from the observation deck, walking the trail that led away from the center and deeper into the forest. The sounds of civilization faded, replaced by the evening chorus of birds and insects, the whisper of wind through pine needles. "Home?" Daniel asked simply when they reached the fork in the path, one branch leading toward their cabin, the other back toward the road. "Home," she confirmed, taking his hand. The snake that had brought them together was long gone, its venom neutralized, its role in their story complete. But its legacy lived on in the woman who now walked these woods with confidence and purpose, in the conservation center she had built, in the corporate policies she had transformed, and in the love that had grown between two people from worlds that should have remained forever separate. As they walked hand in hand through the twilight forest, Eliza reflected on how the most devastating moments can become catalysts for the most profound healing, not just for individuals, but for systems, for relationships, for the wounded places where civilization and wilderness meet. The snake's gift, in the end, had been clarity, the venom of near death washing away illusions, leaving behind only what was essential, true, and worth fighting for. 2 years to the day after the snake bite that had altered the course of her life, Eliza stood at the podium in the newly completed visitor center of Winthrop Wilderness Conservation. Before her, an audience of journalists, corporate partners, environmental advocates, and local community members waited expectantly for her address. The center itself was a testament to the vision she had fought to realize, a harmonious blend of sustainable architecture and educational purpose, where wilderness and human ingenuity met in respectful balance. Timber harvested using halcyon's selective techniques formed the building's bones, while cutting-edge renewable energy systems powered its operations. 2 years ago, Eliza began, her voice clear and confident, I came to these mountains seeking escape. What I found instead was connection, to the land, to a way of living I had never considered, and to a truth about business and conservation that has transformed how Winthrop Industries approaches its responsibilities. From her vantage point, she could see her father seated in the front row, his expression a complex mixture of pride and lingering skepticism. Beside him sat members of the board who had initially opposed her vision, but now proudly claimed credit for the initiative that had boosted both the company's reputation and its long-term profitability. This center represents more than a corporate commitment to sustainability, she continued. It embodies a fundamental shift in how we understand value. The ancient forests that surround us are worth more standing than harvested. The ecosystems they support are assets more precious than any quarterly return. As she spoke, Eliza's gaze drifted to the back of the room, where Daniel stood near the exit. He wore a simple button-down shirt instead of his usual flannel, his concession to the formal nature of the event, but otherwise looked as he always did, steady, grounded, slightly uncomfortable with crowds but present because it mattered to her. Their relationship had deepened over the past 2 years, evolving into a partnership neither had anticipated but both now cherished. The cabin expansion had become a home they shared when her corporate responsibilities allowed, a sanctuary where Eliza could shed the weight of expectations and reconnect with the simpler truths that now guided her life. Today, we open not just a building, but a pathway between wilderness and civilization, between profit and preservation, between the world as it has been and the world as it could be. She gestured to the panoramic windows behind her, where the protected forest stretched to the horizon. What you see isn't untouched wilderness. It's actively managed conservation land, where sustainable forestry practices allow us to harvest timber while maintaining ecosystem health. The skeptics had been proven wrong. The conservation division, far from being a drain on company resources, had generated unprecedented positive publicity, attracted top talent to Winthrop Industries, and opened new markets for sustainably produced products. The financial success had silenced even the most vocal critics on the board. But more meaningful to Eliza were the less quantifiable outcomes. The return of wolf packs to valleys where they had been absent for generations, the restoration of waterways once polluted by industrial runoff, the reforestation of slopes scarred by clear cutting. I want to close by acknowledging someone whose wisdom and courage made all of this possible, Eliza said, her voice softening. Someone who saved not just my life, but my understanding of what a life well-lived could be. Daniel shifted uncomfortably at the back of the room, and Eliza quickly redirected, respecting his aversion to public attention. The indigenous peoples who stewarded these lands for thousands of years before European settlement understood something we are only now rediscovering: that humans are not separate from nature, but an integral part of it, that our well-being is inextricably linked to the health of the ecosystems we inhabit. She smiled. It took a near-death experience for me to recognize this truth. My hope is that centers like this one can offer others the same insight without the snakebite. Laughter rippled through the audience, breaking the solemnity of the moment. As Eliza concluded her remarks and the formal ribbon-cutting began, she felt a profound sense of completion, a circle closing on the journey that had begun with venom and pain, but had led to healing on a scale she could never have imagined. Later, as the crowds thinned and staff began clearing away the reception, Eliza found Daniel standing on the observation deck, looking out over the valley that had become their shared home. "You gave a good speech," he said as she joined him at the railing. "High praise from a man of few words," she replied with a smile. They stood in comfortable silence, watching as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the protected forest. Thousands of acres that would remain unlogged, undeveloped, alive with the complex web of relationships that had evolved over centuries. "Did you ever imagine this?" Eliza asked. "When you found me on the trail that day?" Daniel shook his head. "I was just trying to keep you alive." "You did more than that," she said softly. "You showed me a different way to be alive." He turned to face her, his expression softening. "You did the hard part, taking that understanding back into a world that resists it. Standing your ground when it would have been easier to conform. I had a good teacher in stubbornness," Eliza teased. Daniel's rare laugh warmed her heart. Over the years, those laughs had become less rare, just as her own corporate persona had softened around the edges. They had changed each other, not by trying to, but simply by being fully themselves and creating space for the other to do the same. Daniel had found ways to engage with the broader community through the Conservation Center's educational programs, teaching wilderness medicine and sustainable foraging. Eliza had learned to move more slowly, to listen more deeply, to value silence as much as action. As the sun dipped lower toward the mountains, Vernon Winthrop approached, his security detail hanging back at a discreet distance. "Elizabeth," he nodded, then turned to Daniel with more formality. "Mr. Reed." "Mr. Winthrop," Daniel replied, equally formal but without deference. "The center is impressive," Vernon said, his gaze taking in the sustainable architecture, the educational exhibits, the preserved wilderness beyond. "More impressive is what you've accomplished with the Conservation Division's bottom line." It was high praise from a man who measured success primarily in financial terms. "Thank you, Father," Eliza said. "But the true measure of success is what's happening out there." She gestured to the forest. "The returning wildlife, the improving water quality, the carbon sequestration." Vernon nodded, though Eliza knew he still saw these as secondary benefits rather than primary goals. They had reached a detente over the past 2 years, Vernon acknowledging the business case for her vision, Eliza accepting that transformation within Winthrop Industries would continue to be incremental rather than revolutionary. "Will you both be attending the Foundation Gala next month?" Vernon asked, changing the subject. "The board would appreciate your presence, Elizabeth. And Mr. Reed would be welcome as well, of course." Eliza glanced at Daniel, who gave a slight nod, his willingness to endure another corporate function for her sake. "We'll be there," she confirmed. After Vernon departed, Daniel turned back to the view, his expression thoughtful. "He's trying," he observed. "Yes," Eliza agreed. In his way, the relationship between Daniel and her father remained cordial but distant. Two men who respected each other's strengths but operated from fundamentally different worldviews. Vernon had never quite forgiven Daniel for encouraging Eliza's transformation away from the corporate warrior he had raised her to be, while Daniel remained wary of Vernon's transactional approach to relationships. But they had found common ground in their care for Eliza and in their recognition, however differently expressed, of the value of the work she was doing. As twilight deepened over the valley, Eliza and Daniel made their way down from the observation deck, walking the trail that led away from the center and deeper into the forest. Half a mile in, the sounds of civilization faded entirely, replaced by the evening chorus of birds and insects, the whisper of wind through pine needles. "Home?" Daniel asked simply when they reached the fork in the path, one branch leading toward the cabin they now shared, the other back toward the road where Eliza's car waited. "Home," she confirmed, taking his hand as they turned toward the cabin path. The snake that had brought them together was long gone, its venom neutralized, its role in their story complete. But its legacy lived on in the woman who now walked these woods with confidence and purpose, in the conservation center she had built, in the corporate policies she had transformed, and in the love that had grown against all odds between two people from worlds that should have remained forever separate. As they walked hand in hand through the twilight forest, Eliza reflected on the strange alchemy of fate, how the most devastating moments can become catalysts for the most profound healing, not just for individuals, but for systems, for relationships, for the wounded places where civilization and wilderness meet. The path ahead wasn't perfect. There would always be resistance to change, always tension between competing values and visions. But in that tension, in that space between worlds, Eliza had found her true calling and her deepest joy. The snake's gift, in the end, had been clarity, the venom of near death washing away illusions, leaving behind only what was essential, true, and worth fighting for.